This is Art Television.
Coming up, State of Business, sponsored by...
Stay well connected at home or on the go with SLT Mobitel.
IWS Aviation.
Good evening and welcome to the State of Business. I am Chavika Samarasinghe. Let's have a look at the headlines first. Curfew imposed in Colombo until tomorrow morning. International community expresses support for the popular uprising. News in detail. The Government Information Department announced that Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, exercising his powers as acting president, declared curfew within the Colombo district from 12 noon today until 5 a.m. tomorrow. Meanwhile, the protesters at Golfay's site announced that all government buildings, including the President's House, President's Office and the Prime Minister's Office, will be handed over to authorities. The Gazette notification regarding the curfew said that no person shall be on any public road, railway, public park, recreation park or other public ground or seashore in such areas. Exceptions to this are provided under a written permit granted by the Secretary to the Ministry of Defence, Secretary to the Ministry of Public Security, Inspector General of Police or any other officer appointed by them. The Sri Lanka Air Force on the 13th confirmed the provision of an Air Force military plane for President Gotabaya Rajapaksa to leave the island for the Maldives. Issuing a statement, the Air Force said that an Air Force plane was provided in the early morning hours for the President to leave the Katunayake International Airport. Reuters news agency reported that President Rajapaksa, who was in the Maldives, left for Singapore this evening. Initially, the President had told the Speaker that he would be sending his resignation letter before midnight on the 13th. However, the much-expected resignation letter was not received until this evening. Meanwhile, at a special meeting at Parliament yesterday, with the participation of members of the Committee on Parliamentary Business and party leaders, it was decided that the Prime Minister should also resign from his position as soon as possible. In the meantime, the government imposed an island-wide curfew yesterday until 5 a.m. this morning. Again, a curfew, this time limited to the Colombo Administrative District, was imposed at 12 until 5 a.m. tomorrow. Investors are shifting their focus to Sri Lanka's bilateral creditors as the resignations of the President and the Prime Minister dim prospects for rapid aid from the International Monetary Fund. Global asset managers predict delays in loan disbursements, with the Citigroup economists forecasting payouts not before early 2023. Sri Lanka's dollar bonds sank to a record low below 30 cents on the dollar on Monday, following news on the resignations of top leaders. Notes due in 2030 were indicated at 26.8 cents on the dollar on Tuesday, according to Bloomberg data. Global funds hold about $12.6 billion of Sri Lanka's foreign currency debt, with roughly an equivalent amount held by bilateral creditors. The IMF is monitoring the situation and hopes for a resolution which allows talks to resume, its mission chief said in a statement on Sunday after mass public protests which forced the President and Prime Minister to announce their intention to resign. Meanwhile, the multilateral lender plans to continue technical negotiations with the Central Bank of Sri Lanka and Finance Ministry bureaucrats. The IMF is awaiting a proposal from Sri Lanka on reducing debt. The key submission, once approved by the IMF, will then have to be taken to bondholders and will form the basis for debt restructuring talks. The risk is that a new administration could cancel contracts with Lazard and Clifford Chance, firms that President Rajapaksa's government had signed on as financial and legal advisors respectively. This could mean further delays on debt negotiations until new tenders are issued and winners identified. China and Japan both account for roughly 10% each of Sri Lanka's non-rupee debt, though Prime Minister Wickremesinghe has said interest rates on Chinese loans are much higher. India and Japan are pushing the IMF to treat China on par with other creditors. China, on its part, is concerned that its repayments could be delayed if lumped with other debt holders, Sri Lankan officials have previously stated. India is now seeking payment in advance for supply of fuel after credit lines were exhausted. India has provided about $3.8 billion in assistance this year. Sri Lanka's immediate hope is help from the World Food Programme. A choice of a presidential candidate who holds the trust of the people and can win support from the international community is also a vital requirement. As the international community continues to monitor the situation in Sri Lanka, they express concern over the deteriorating situation and urge the leaders to make swift decisions to satisfy the demands of the popular uprising. We now share with you messages from a few key figures. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres says addressing the root cause of Sri Lanka's ongoing unrest is important and urges all party leaders to work toward a peaceful and democratic transition of power. The UN Resident Coordinator in Sri Lanka, in a statement, said that the UN stands in solidarity with the people of Sri Lanka who are calling for democracy, accountability and transparency from their leaders. It is important that all incidents of violence against journalists, peaceful protesters and harm to property are investigated and that those responsible are held accountable. Given the ongoing economic crisis, there is a need for a smooth transition to a legitimate government that can continue dialogue with all relevant national and international stakeholders to help Sri Lanka cope with this worst economic crisis since independence. Food security, agriculture, livelihoods and access to health for the most vulnerable must be prioritized for immediate action to avoid further suffering. The UN continues to monitor the situation closely and is ready to assist in dialogue as needed. As it does around the world, the UN calls for respect for human rights, rule of law, and democratic governance in Sri Lanka. Meanwhile, the US Ambassador Julie Chang, in a tweet yesterday, reiterated the US call for calm and condemned all violence while calling for the rule of law to be upheld. Stay tuned. We will return after this commercial break.
Ultra-fast connectivity for businesses and homes. From the only network that can provide 100 to 1000 Mbps speeds. For over 1 million fiber connections. Buy online from sltmobitel.lk to get connected to SLT Mobitel Fiber, the fiber of the nation.
Grappling with subjects. Expressing feelings.
I am not very creative yet, but I would love to be considered an artist one day.
Looking for new perspectives.
You want to help not with weapons, but with your camera.
Doing things differently. Come to the place where we reflect on society. Arts 21 on DW.
Welcome back. The Reserve Bank of India has allowed trade settlements between India and other countries, including Sri Lanka and Russia, in Indian rupees. Banks are to obtain approval on such transactions. In a recent notification, the RBI stated that it has decided to put in place an additional arrangement for invoicing, payment and settlement of exports and imports in Indian rupees. It holds that this was done in order to promote the growth of global trade, with emphasis on exports from India, and to support the increasing interest of the global trading community in the Indian rupee. The RBI said, for settling trade transactions with any country, banks in India might open special vostro accounts of corresponding banks from the partner country in trading. Indian exporters sending out goods and services through this mechanism should be paid in Indian rupees from the balances in the designated special vostro accounts of the corresponding bank of the partner country, the notification said. According to the Sri Lankan High Commission, in 2020, India was Sri Lanka's second largest trading partner, with bilateral merchandise trade amounting to around $3.6 billion. Regarding the use of its surplus balance, the RBI said it could be used for capital and current account transactions in accordance with mutual agreements. The balance in special vostro accounts can be utilized for payments for projects and investments, export and import advance flow management, and investment in government securities, the Indian Central Bank said. High oil prices have yet to dampen demand, which is set to continue rising and may soon outstrip supply, the International Energy Agency warned yesterday. It cautioned that the global economic recovery could be derailed unless governments take measures to reduce consumption and fuel prices that pose a threat to the stability in some nations. Oil prices have surged from around $80 per barrel earlier this year to over $120 at times, as Russia's invasion of Ukraine has sparked supply concerns and China's post-COVID economic reopening has boosted demand. If high petrol prices have started to dent demand in industrialized nations, the IEA said that this has been counterbalanced by larger than expected rebounds in demand by China and some emerging and developed nations. The IEA now expects oil demand to rise this year to 99.2 million barrels per day and to 101.3 million barrels per day next year. Meanwhile, supply rose to 100.1 million barrels per day this year. But even if it hits the expected record of 101.1 million barrels per day next year, it will fall below demand. The IEA noted that the world has little spare capacity to increase production, with the combined buffer of Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates set to fall to just 2.2 million barrels per day in August. It said the production of OPEC nations could even fall next year if Russia's supply is impacted by tightening international sanctions. Coupled with tight refinery margins causing imbalances in certain product markets and putting upward pressure on prices, it may be up to demand-side measures to bring down consumption and fuel costs. The IEA added that the strengthening of the dollar versus other currencies as the US Federal Reserve hikes interest rates is contributing to rising import costs for food and oil. This creates significant obstacles for numerous developing and emerging nations, including Sri Lanka. The ongoing economic crisis in Sri Lanka calls for immediate assistance for the most vulnerable communities who are severely affected by the medical and food shortage. The United Nations Development Programme in Sri Lanka recently launched a facility for emergency relief. The facility launched by the UNDP is the Individual and Private Sector Giving Facility for Emergency Relief, to facilitate interested private sector organizations and individuals to contribute towards the procurement of urgent medical supplies and addressing food security needs. This facility was launched with Hemas Holdings plc, Dilma Ceylon Tea Company, Brandix Apparel Limited and Dara Sri Lanka coming on board to pledge their commitment. In response, Brandix Apparel Limited has come forward to contribute towards the facility on food security related efforts by partnering to cultivate 500 acres during the mid-season. An exchange of letters took place recently between Ashraf Omar, Group CEO, Brandix Apparel Limited, and Robert Jukum, Resident Representative UNDP in Sri Lanka. The strategic investment of 500 acres of cowpea and mung beans under UN-cultivated minor irrigation tanks will help support 1,000 vulnerable farmers during the late Yala and mid-season in the selected areas of Kurunagala, Puttalam, Anuradhapura, Polonnaruwa, Mana, Vavuniya and Trincomalee. Stay tuned for stock updates.
More data when you stay and use more. Data ball one, data ball one. More data with low latency. Data ball one, data ball one. Take it everywhere with SLT Go. Data ball one, data ball one.
A non-stop journey with Data Ball One from SLT Mobitel Home Broadband.
Trading at the Colombo Stock Exchange ended on negative notes today. The all-share price index dropped 47.43 points to close at 7,318.24, and the S&P SL20 dropped 15.14 points to close at 2,350.08. The turnover was 0.6 billion rupees, and over 44 million shares were traded. Up next are Forex rates. That's all our news for today. Take care and good night.
State of Business was sponsored by
Stay well connected at home or on the go with SLT Mobitel.
IWS Aviation.